All right, I think that's going now. So yeah, so all the way back in July, I shared the story of Belizean botanist Percy Gentle. And in that presentation, I mentioned that he worked with two American botanists from the University of Michigan, H.H. Bartlett and Dr. C.L. Lundell. And so today I'm going to share information I was found about one of them, C.L. Lundell. So a lot of our Percy Gentle specimens, like this one, are listed as collected for C.L. Lundell. And then also we do have some specimens like this one that were collected by him himself. This one was collected in La Libertad, which is in this large Petén region of Guatemala in 1933. I'll show you the specimen image here. So you can see some little wood chips kind of mixed in there. And the label says it was collected on rotten wood. So that kind of makes sense. And I also included just some other images from that species, a little fresher version of it. And C.L. Lundell was Cyrus Longworth Lundell, which is another really great name. He was an American botanist born in 1907 in Austin, Texas. He attended Columbia University and Southern Methodist University for his undergraduate studies and earned his bachelor's in 1932. He did study in the Graduate School of Business Administration at New York University for a time, but he didn't complete that degree and ended up getting a master's in 1934 and a PhD in 1936 at the University of Michigan. But back in 1928, when he was just a sophomore, he was appointed as an assistant physiologist with the Tropical Plant Research Institute and worked in British Honduras, which you might remember is the current modern country of Belize in Central America, kind of next to Guatemala and Mexico. And in that position, he helped experiment with the sapodilla tree, which is one of the sources of chicle, which you might know is a natural plant gum that was the main ingredient in chewing gum until at least the 1960s. And one source said that in 1930, the US imported 14 million pounds of chicle, and it was a $100 million industry, so pretty important. And Lundell spent a couple of seasons, field seasons, doing tapping experiments in that area. So he continued research in Central America for several years. And his work was a combination of conservation and economics. So he sought to document the flora of the local areas while exploring their commercial applications. And also alongside botany, he was interested in the Maya culture and archaeology, and there are many ancient sites found throughout that region where he was working and collecting plants. So while working for the Tropical Plant Research Foundation in 1931, he was studying and collecting plants in the southern Campeche region of Mexico when he rediscovered the Maya city of Calakmul, which had been hidden in the dense forest for 1,000 years. So the site is here in red, and it's in Mexico, but it's just north of the border with Guatemala. So the story goes that in late December, he and an assistant called El Grillo and a guide named Garcia were cutting their way through the jungle, and they discovered a large stone monolith or stela. And they spent the next 3 days exploring the site and found 65 stelae and 2 great pyramids, including this one, which is pretty impressive. And Lundell named the site Calakmul, which means the city of 2 adjacent pyramids, very literal. And we know now that in ancient times, the city center was called Oxtetun, which meant 3 stones. So Lundell notified Sylvanus Morley, who was an archaeologist, working for the Carnegie Institute of Washington at Chichen Itza, who confirmed the importance of the location. It turns out it was one of the oldest and most powerful Mayan cities discovered in the lowlands, and it was the seat of the Kingdom of the Snake. So there are over 6,000 ancient structures at the site, and it's estimated to have been home to a population of 50,000 people. So some work was done back in the 30s, so right afterwards, but because it was so isolated, the site itself was not fully mapped or studied in depth until another team came in 1982, so quite a gap. But the location including striking artwork and objects, including 9 jade funerary masks, which are really important to understanding the classical Maya period, which is really cool. So Lundell rediscovered the ruins of 16 Mayan cities between 1931 and 33. And I put rediscovered in quotes because it's almost certain that these sites were already known to the local Maya peoples and the Chicleros who were working in the jungle. And Lundell openly acknowledges this. So in his article about their discovery, he says the local Maya were surely aware of its location, and then a local administrator had given them some information about nearby ruins before they got to Calakmul. And that being said, he was the first to make these sites known to the wider archaeological community. So pretty neat. So from 1932 to 35, Lundell worked as an assistant at the Botanical Gardens at the University of Michigan, and then as an assistant curator and eventually the main curator of the Herbarium starting in 1939. During that time, he was also a research associate of the Carnegie Institute and made a number of expeditions to Guatemala, Mexico, and British Honduras, now Belize, continuing to study both the regional flora and the Mayan civilization. In the 1940s, he worked as a professor of botany at Southern Methodist University in Texas, and he founded the university's herbarium and was its director from 46 to 48. In 1944, he began a crusade to save the Texas Blackland Prairies, and these are a temperate grassland ecoregion located in Texas. So it's this number 32 here on the map. And the prairie is called Blacklands after its rich, dark soil. Because of that soil, it was extensively exploited for agriculture, and less than 1% of the original Blackland prairie vegetation remains. And what does is scattered across Texas in fragments. So he established this Institute of Technology and Plant Industry to study and protect the habitat. In 1946, it became the Texas Research Foundation, and he served as its executive vice president, director, chief scientist, and the head of the agricultural lab from 1948 all the way to 1972. In 1972, he began work as the director of plant science lab at the University of Texas in Dallas, while also working as a professor of plant science. From 1975 to 78, he taught botany and environmental science, and he was made a professor emeritus after his retirement in 1978. So Lundell started the botanical journal Wrightia in 1945, and he authored or co-authored over 200 scientific and popular papers and various books, including this Flora of Texas. He discovered and identified more than 2,000 undescribed plants, many of them native to Central America and Texas, or Texas. In 1981, he was awarded the Order of the Quetzal, which is Guatemala's highest honor. And his nomination was made by Guatemala's leaders in government and science to commemorate his 50 years of research in botany, agriculture, and Mayan archaeology. In 1987, his Texas Research Foundation became the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, which is known as BRIT. And in 1994, he was awarded their International Award of Excellence posthumously after his death at the age of 86. So the Plant Resource Center of the University of Texas at Austin named their journal Lundellia after him. And there are at least 2 plant genera named after him. I don't think they're valid anymore, but also 70 different species. And he is also commemorated in the scientific name of Lundells spiny lizard, which is found in Mexico and Belize and has this beautiful, striking blue throat, which I think is super rad. So there are over 900 specimens collected by Lundell in the Bryophyte portal, just under 100 in the lichen portal, and 23,000 plus in the vascular symbiota. So while we do have mosses from his time in Belize, Guatemala, Mexico, and Texas, they were clearly not the main focus of his work. You will see a really wide range of plants represented in his specimens, so he had broad interests. And I did look to see if I could find anything that he collected at Calakmul ruins or during that trip. The closest I could get was December 22nd, this moss, and another plant specimen from December 27th. He reports finding the ruins on December 29th. So not exactly, but close by on his way there. I still think it would be cool to find a moss growing on the pyramid or something like that. So perhaps it's in someone's collection and it just hasn't been digitized yet. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. So that's an overview of C.L. Lundell, but I'm not going to end quite yet because my research this week on him led me to an associated collector closely connected with C.L. Lundell. So you'll see on this specimen here from Mexico in 1937, the name Amelia A. Lundell, who is actually the wife of C.L. Lundell. And she was also a botanical collector and illustrator, but unfortunately, there's a lot less information about her life and her career. She's actually listed as part of Wikipedia's Women in Red project, which highlights women of note who don't have their own Wikipedia article yet. So you'll see her name here. And what I could find out about her is that she was born Amelia Anderson in 1908 in Fort Worth, Texas. I don't have any information about her education, but she married C.L. In 1931. They had 2 children together. And she did collect with her husband on his expeditions in the 1930s to Guatemala, Mexico, Belize. And you'll see her name kind of with his as well as on its own on some of the specimens. Interesting, one source mentioned that they discovered 450 new plants in Central America, including the wild precursors of several food crops like squash, pinto beans, chili peppers, chocolate, and coffee. And Lundell describes the area as the food cradle of the Western world, and thought that his work in this arena was more important than the discovery of any of the ancient cities, which is pretty neat. So this particular specimen is a holotype of, I do not know how to pronounce it, maybe Q. curbita fraterna, which is the wild progenitor of the nearest relative of Q. curbita, perhaps Peppo, which is the domesticated species that produces squash and pumpkins. It was collected in 1937 by C.L. and Amelia, and it's marked as a holotype. So it was used by this L.H. Bailey to describe that as a new species in 1943. But I did notice something kind of interesting on the label. So there's a note at the bottom that A.A. Lundell is not included as a collector in the official species description. And I'm not sure if that was an accident or an oversight or intentional, but I think it's a shame that her contribution kind of dropped off at that point. She is at least recorded on the collector on the original specimen. And I guess that's a reminder why it's important to make sure we're transcribing those associated collectors and everyone's getting credit for their work and participation. So Amelia collected also in the United States, especially in Texas. And her obituary mentions that she drew all the insects in the Dallas Planting Manual, donated her illustrations of shells and wildflowers to the Botanical Research Institute of Texas, and that the rare book room at UT Austin has some of her paintings on its walls. And sadly, I was not able to find any images online of her works. And she passed away in 1998. So her husband actually named 5 new plant species after Amelia, including Abronia Amelia, which is here, Amelia sanverbena, which they found together on a collecting trip to the Texas coast. These 3 specimens were all collected by the couple and named after Amelia. And I'm happy to report that in his species descriptions, of new species, that CL made sure to include her as a co-collector, which is very fitting and appropriate. So those numbers I gave you for Lundell specimens are actually for both spouses. It's just by last name. So out of those totals, I was able to find 272 bryophytes, 8 lichens, and over 6,000 of those vascular specimens were collected or co-collected by Amelia. And yeah, so that is Cyrus and Amelia Lundell, a very productive botanical couple. And yeah, thank you again for listening.